TV Guide called it, quote, one of the most visually influential science fiction films ever made, unquote. The film has reportedly appeared on more top 5 sci-fi lists than any other film. Nominated for several Academy and Golden Globe Awards, the film was initially released to mixed reviews, but gained popularity as time went on. Sound like Star Wars? Not quite. It's Blade Runner, Ridley Scott's future noir classic starring Harrison Ford. And today, we're going to unearth the influences it had on Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And then, we're going to dig a little deeper. You're listening to Digging Star Wars, the online journal of the films that inspired George Lucas to create the Star Wars saga. I'm your host, Chris Mitch. Welcome into our first episode of Season 2. We have a lot to discuss, so let's get started. Our guest today was supposed to be Stephanie Frederick, a web designer, fellow Star Wars fan, and longtime friend of mine. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond her control, Steph could not make the recording of this episode. However, I have asked Steph to share her notes on Blade Runner and The Phantom Menace on our blog at diggingstarwars.blogspot.com, so please look for Steph's insights and add your own as well. Okay, for those who have never seen Blade Runner, permit me to give you the basic gist of the film. The film is based on Philip K. Dick's book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and was directed by Ridley Scott. Scott's other works include Black Hawk Down, Thelma and Louise, and Gladiator. Blade Runner stars Harrison Ford, already a household name circa 1982, due to his roles in the original Star Wars and Indiana Jones films. Additional cast members include Rutger Hauer, Sean Young, Edward James Olmos, and Daryl Hannah. There are multiple versions of the film. The original theatrical release had a watered-down narration track by Harrison Ford. This track was the idea of studio execs who had the final say in the final picture and felt without narration audiences would be lost and unable to follow the story. Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford hated the idea of the narration, but lacked the creative control to stop it. Ford would later admit he was dragged into the voiceover booth, kicking and screaming in protest. In the early 90s, once the film had a legit following, Warner Brothers re-released a director's cut that omitted Ford's voiceover track and has an additional scene involving a daydream of Ford's character, Rick Deckard. This is the version of the film we're discussing today on Digging Star Wars. Just so you know, there is another, more recent version of Blade Runner denoted as the Final Cut. I haven't seen it yet, and there's little difference content-wise between the director's cut and the final cut. If any of you have seen this latest cut, please comment on the blog what's different about it. While I don't want to spoil every aspect of the film, I feel I should at least provide a quick synopsis of the story. Here is an excerpt from the synopsis available on the film's official website. A hauntingly eerie, prophetic mixture of science fiction and film noir. Director Ridley Scott's Blade Runner boasts one of the most astonishingly designed futures ever put on film. A dark, decaying Los Angeles circa 2019. Blade Runner stars Harrison Ford as Rick Deckard, a one-time Blade Runner or sanctioned assassin. Blade Runner begins with the cynical, world-weary Deckard being called out of retirement to stop 4 replicants, genetically altered humans with superior strength and intellects who are used as slave labor on off-world colonies. These homicidal androids have returned to Earth for a murderous killing spree. Their leader is Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, a dangerous combat model whose ultimate target is Eldon Tyrell, owner of the same corporation that created Roy. But Deckard has to find Batty before he can stop him. His investigation now leads Deckard across the glittering heights and disintegrating depths of a fantastically imagined metropolis, one whose cloud-piercing pyramids, enormous neon billboards, and sleek flying cars are offset by terrible overcrowding and downpours of acid rain. Before his search is over, Deckard will find himself falling in love with Rachel, Tyrell's beautiful, mysterious assistant. He will also face off against Batty in brutal hand-to-hand combat. But Deckard's most troubling discovery will be the suspicion that he just might be a replicant himself. Now, I realize that doesn't paint the full picture of Blade Runner, but certainly enough to start our discussion. When I first started researching films for Digging Star Wars a year or so ago, Blade Runner was one of my first films that caught my eye. IMDb listed it as an influential film upon Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. While it's odd to think that the R-rated Blade Runner could influence kitty-centric Episode 1, it made a lot of sense when you link Blade Runner's versions of Los Angeles circa 2019 to Episode 1's city planet of Coruscant. Granted, in Episode 1, the city is almost romanticized with gleaming sunlight off mirrored skyscrapers during sunset. It's not until Episode 2 that Anakin and Obi-Wan venture into the neon-lit streets of Coruscant, in and out of seedy nightclubs and greasy diners. But is Coruscant of Episode 1 really a direct descendant of Blade Runner? Sort of. Prior to Episode 1, the first time Star Wars fans heard and saw Coruscant in any way was through the Shadow of the Empire novel, video game, comics, and additional media products which were part of a simultaneous non-film release of an official Star Wars story in the 90s. This unique marketing ploy kept Star Wars alive and well, and on the minds of fans as they waited for the special edition of the original trilogy and the prequels. Shadow of the Empire takes place between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and featured several main original trilogy characters venturing to Coruscant. Images of Coruscant were, of course, in the comics and video game, as well as artistic renderings in the liner notes of an orchestral score for the novel. Several of the liner note illustrations feature a Mayan-like structure, supposedly the palace of Xizor, the villain of the story. This palace is extremely similar in size, coloring, and design to Eldon Tyrell's building in Blade Runner. Xizor's palace was not on screen in Episode 1, to my knowledge, but was the first experience many fans had of Coruscant before they saw the city planet in Episode 1. Sure, there are flying cars and overpopulation on Coruscant, but Xizor's palace and Tyrell's corporation headquarters are concrete connections between Episode 1 and Blade Runner. This is Digging Star Wars, and you just heard an excerpt from a track titled Lux 3 from a previous guest on our program, Peter Fay. Ironically, both Blade Runner and The Phantom Menace feature an overpowering urban setting as well as interesting representations of nature, not only from a production viewpoint, but in a metaphorical sense too. I was able to explore and research these connections last week when I was fortunate enough to participate in a class through the Pennsylvania Writing and Literature Project. The 5-day class was entitled Literacy in Bloom, Botanical Inspirations for Reading, Writing, and Learning, or Lit in Bloom for short. Held at Longwood Gardens in Kennett, Pennsylvania, Lit in Bloom was run by course coordinator Patty Kohler and explores the many connections between literature, nature, and teaching. While there were plenty of books discussed in the course, primary texts originate from chairman of the Children and Nature Network, Richard Louv. The award-winning Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder, Louv's most famous work, is an extremely compelling argument about how children of today and the past decade or so belong to a third frontier. There are numerous characteristics of the third frontier, but the main concern is that children are no longer connected to nature as they once were in previous generations, including my own. The first and second frontier played freely outdoors in imaginative play, and had direct experiences in nature such as fishing, gardening, building tree houses, and so on. Last Child is a fascinating read, and several theories discussed in the book tie directly to elements found in both Blade Runner and The Phantom Menace. For starters, in Blade Runner, Deckard encounters a snake and an owl in urban settings. When he asks the owners of these pets if they're real, the owners scoff and assure them the animals are genetically made. I found this attribute of the film to be in line with Louv's third frontier, which has, quote, a disappearing line between machines, humans, and other animals, unquote. In Blade Runner, man can no longer distinguish real animals from ones created by machines and technicians. The official Blade Runner website even points out that, quote, each major character in Blade Runner is associated with an animal at some point in the film. For instance, Eldon Tyrell keeps an owl in his office, and Leon is asked a question about a tortoise during his Voight-Kampff test, unquote. Keep in mind, most of the characters in Blade Runner are not human, but replicants. The next time you watch Blade Runner, try to determine what animals are represented by replicant leader Roy, nervous designer J.F. Sebastian, the sultry Rachel, and replicants Zora and Pris. Obviously, Louv's observations of the blurred line between machines and nature is present in the replicants. However, consider this. In the director's cut, Deckard has a dream about a unicorn running through the forest, and it is that scene that points both the audience and Deckard to the realization that he himself is indeed a genetically made replicant. Deckard's lack of self-awareness, as well as the audience's inability to distinguish Deckard from Roy Batty and the other replicants, also emphasizes the blurred line between machines and nature. The blurred line is also present in Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace. As Star Wars fans already know, the home planet of both Padme and Palpatine, the beautiful planet of Naboo, has two distinct cultures. The Naboo people, human-like beings who live in romantic cities where art and architecture flourish, and the Gungans, an aquatic lizard-like species who live in underwater cities and sacred bogs. While these two cultures are not at war with each other in Menace, they have previously ignored each other and, to some extent, despised their symbiotic counterparts. When the mechanized battle droid army invades their planet, they're forced to work with each other. Again, the line between machines, humans, and other animals is blurred. And even where the lines are blurred is significant. More on that after this short break. Welcome back. I took the Lit and Bloom course on the grounds of Longwood Gardens in Kennett, PA. For those of you who have never seen or heard of Longwood Gardens, quite simply, it's magnificent. Here's how their own website, longwoodgarden.org, describes this place. Quote, Longwood Gardens is sure to delight anyone who loves exquisite flowers, majestic trees, and opulent architecture. Here, amid 1,077 acres with 20 indoor and 20 outdoor gardens, you'll find beauty at every turn, unquote. Amongst its many attractions, Longwood also has a grassy, amphitheater-style hill-valley formation known as, quote, the landform, unquote. Designed by landscape architect Kim Wilkie, the landform divides a section of unkept, natural woods apart from Longwood's prized and highly maintained conservatory. Wilkie's overall design philosophy of the landform, according to Longwood Gardens conservatory gardener Carl Gersons, is to blur the line between random nature, the woods, and the man-made structuring of nature, the conservatory. The disappearing line between machines, humans, and animals aspect of the third frontier manifests itself in the landform's grassy hills and valleys, an area that divides yet blurs nature in various forms. The landform reminded me of the grassy hills and plains on the planet Naboo that separate the Gungan territory from Theed, the capital of the Naboo people. While the plains divide the animal-like Gungans and human Nubians, it also is the locale of the final battle between machines, namely the battle droid army, and animals, the Gungans. Once again, the grassy plains serve as the perfect setting for the distorted division of man, machine, and animals. In addition to Richard Louv's work, I also conducted research in the following two books during the Lit and Bloom course. Bobby J. Ward's A Contemplation Upon Flowers, Garden Plants in Myth and Literature, and Lucia and Peluso's Gardens and Art. Both books presented an art history approach to flowers and plants, citing use of certain flora, gardening styles, and other natural elements in art and literature, and what myths, symbolism, and cultural significance these icons possess and communicate. Naturally, with Naboo, you have a tremendous amount of nature to discuss. I limited my research to the many ferns around Gunton Lake near Untagunga, and the man-made jasmine-like ivy, topiary, and waterfalls throughout Theed. Here's what I found in regards to the ferns near the Gungan Lakes. While the ferns are reminiscent of plant life found in Return of the Jedi's Moon of Endor, classic literature and folklore tell tales of this plant possessing magical powers, including invisibility, the power to ward off lightning, and the ability to control evil beings. All these aspects apply to the Gungans in some way. The Gungans become invisible, so to speak, as they are able to hide from the droid army in sacred places, while the Naboo people are captured and put in camps. Gungans harness lightning with their power shields and energy balls, which disable battle droids and their tanks. And everyone's favorite Gungan Jar Jar is able to manipulate the evil battle droids and destroyer droids to shoot at each other in the midst of the final battle. Now on to Theed, the crown jewel and capital of the Naboo people, a city built on the edge of a waterfall and a true work of art with topiary-style ornamentations. Episode 1 visual effects producer Jeff Olson oversaw production of the miniature models of Theed used in the Phantom Menace film production and called the chance to design Theed, quote, "It was like building Venice, a classical Renaissance city of the future," unquote. Naboo is meant to represent the highest blend of art and life that man can accomplish. Throughout the Naboo capital of Theed, ivy climbs the walls of various terraces, spaceship hangars, and the like. Based on data collected during my time at Longwood Gardens, I believe this manufactured ivy to be a combination of star jasmine from China, a plant also found in Italy where the interior Naboo scenes were filmed, and classic ivy, whose literary and cultural references involve fidelity, marriage, friendship, love, and obsession. While the significance of jasmine is somewhat limited, the aspects of ivy, particularly love and obsession, pertain directly to Padme and Anakin Skywalker's relationship, which first takes root in The Phantom Menace. Topiary, the art of training, cutting, and trimming trees or shrubs into ornamental shapes, is also present throughout the Naboo city of Theed. Topiary was also condemned by 18th century England as a, quote, tyrannization of nature, unquote. And topiary in Theed echoes the Naboo's feelings towards nature and most likely the Gungans. To the Naboo people, civilization and art are more important than integrating free citizens of nature. Nature is either a medium to be manipulated or a distant chaos to be ignored. Finally, water on Naboo is a huge natural element to consider, particularly the beautiful waterfall. While Gungans live underwater, the Naboo people built their capital on a waterfall. Impaluzzo writes in his book, Gardens and Art, quote, "The sudden roar of a waterfall can elicit surprise, apprehension, and even fear of the unknown," unquote. As some Star Wars fans know, there was a deleted Episode 1 waterfall scene where Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Jar Jar arrive via a submarine-type ship in a canal, only to realize they are dangerously close to the waterfall's edge. The scene is full of surprise, apprehension, and fear. Yet, on a grander scale, the waterfalls of Theed seen in multiple establishing shots of the occupied Nubian capital also represent the Naboo people's surprise, apprehension, and fear of the unknown. Prior to the droid army invasion, they had more faith in diplomacy than defense and are caught off guard by the attack upon their planet. Some Naboo leaders are apprehensive in taking on the fight and must conquer their fear of the unknown by humbling themselves and begging the Gungans for aid in the final battle. I hope you enjoyed this cross-examination of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and George Lucas's Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And if I may be so bold, I'd like to ask you to step outside, literally. Get yourself and get the kids outdoors. A few weeks ago, I took my 8-year-old son with his action figures into the woods where we staged a great battle by a small creek. It was something I did a lot as a kid, and my son had just as much fun playing in the woods as I did. If you're looking to merge your love of Star Wars with nature and travel, I recommend researching locations Lucas and Company filmed the Star Wars movies and going there. Many locales, both domestic and abroad, have guided tours available, and they are really entertaining, especially if you go with fellow fans. Please join us next month here on Digging Star Wars, where we will explore Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones and Steven Spielberg's sci-fi classic Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And, as always, I invite and implore you to comment on this episode right on our website at diggingstarwars.blogspot.com. I'm looking for other nature observations in either Blade Runner or The Phantom Menace we may have missed, as well as any outdoor Star Wars memories or ideas, be it movies in the park, action figure battles at the beach, or anything in between. As always, take care, and thanks for listening.
Digging Star Wars is produced by Mitch Media and has no connection to Lucasfilm Limited whatsoever. Copyrights for films, trademark characters, and related materials discussed in Digging Star Wars remain with their respective owners. For a list of references or source material, please send an email to diggingstarwars@gmail.com.